This week in IT, we've got a special edition for you where Stephen Rose, our Chief Technology Strategist, interviews Richard Campbell, who you'll probably know from RunAs Radio, about the significant AI announcements that were made at Build, the Microsoft Fabric and how it's going to help organizations work with their corporate data, the changes to Windows with Windows Copilot and how that could be the next revolutionary step in productivity, and privacy and security concerns with artificial intelligence in the workplace. So, without any further ado, I'll hand you straight over to Stephen and Richard. Enjoy the interview.
Hey everybody, welcome to Build. It's been a really interesting keynote, day one, lots of chat, and specifically it really seems to be all AI all the time here. So I thought, who's a good expert? Someone I know that has a good understanding of AI, history, where we've been, where we're going. I thought Mr. Richard Campbell would be a perfect person to join me.
It's good to see you, friend.
Good to see you.
Not used to a one-topic keynote out of Microsoft.
No, not at all. Yeah. But before we jump into all that, you do .NET Rocks, RunAs Radio, a bunch of stuff. For the folks who do not know you, take a moment and just sort of introduce yourself.
My name is Richard Campbell. I make a lot of podcasts. .NET Rocks is a show focused for .NET developers. RunAs Radio for sysadmins. They're both old. Like we've been doing them a long time. It's 1,850 episodes of .NET Rocks. There's almost 900 episodes of RunAs now.
I was on .NET Rocks 15 plus years ago.
Yeah.
That's how long you've been doing it.
Yeah.
You and Carl.
Crazy. Now, we have that moment where folks come on that have listened to us their entire careers and now are guests.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like, someday I want to be on that show. Yeah, that happens to us.
And RunAs, I think I'm in the 5 or 6 timers club.
Yeah, you're up there.
Yeah.
You were one of my regulars. You keep changing roles and we'd have to have new conversations around that.
But so many friends of ours have been on that show and you've done great work over the years.
Thanks.
But
I've spent a long time being an enterprise architect, being a system administrator, built a lot of data centers at times, have a number of different business ventures that have come and gone in various respects. I'm getting on in years. I like making my podcasts. I like making conferences. I advise companies these days mostly. I don't make another company.
So AI all the time, I think, brings up an interesting conversation for IT pros. Mm-hmm. And I think they're like, okay, all this stuff is coming at us. Is it hype? Is it really going to happen? How is this going to change my job and the jobs of people? I mean, the numbers that I've been seeing I thought were interesting. I was reading a survey a few weeks ago that 70% of people that work for a company have tried ChatGPT. 40% of the information they put in there is confidential information, and only 7% would go to their boss and say, hey, I'm using this tool.
Right.
So there's still a lot of stigma. There's still a lot of unknown. I think there's a lot of concern over security, what's being kept, what goes into a learning language model. So I thought it'd be great to kind of talk about, first of all, the announcements today, and then what does that mean for folks? So out of the announcement today, what were some of the most significant things that you heard?
Well, I think the biggest part was Microsoft delivering on the classic promise. It's like, hey, you like ChatGPT?
Right.
Would you like one?
Right.
So doing what they're good at, which is providing developers options to get involved. I thought the adoption of the OpenAI plugin model was really smart because that's really about you building what you know how to build.
Right.
Essentially providing your application into that infrastructure. They stay responsible for the whole chat part of that.
Right.
Although that's always going to be true because we know these large language models are immense. Only cloud providers are going to make them because you need so much cloud. It doesn't make sense to do it any other way. But I really like that Microsoft is moderating your language. Like clearly we're in a Gartner hype cycle right now.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that Sam Altman and co planned on getting 100 million users for ChatGPT in November. This was a surprise for everybody.
Yeah.
But now that it's happened and you're on that ride, it's okay. We're going to disappoint people inevitably.
Right.
People are going to start promising things. They're going to start expecting things that aren't going to happen.
Right.
And that's going to then send us down to that sort of state of disillusionment. But it is a useful tool. And so what you really saw in the keynote is for them talking about what it really is, which is a UX layer.
Yeah.
It's not Skynet. It's not Megan.
It's not
an artificial intelligence, full stop, right?
Yeah.
You may put the AI umbrella over this, but I've always looked at artificial intelligence as the technology that doesn't work yet. Because the moment it does work, it gets a new name.
Yeah.
It becomes image recognition and translation and data modeling and large language models.
Yeah.
So we've now learned to make a large language model that can represent a conversational way to interact with software. And that has some potential merits. I think more than anything in discoverability.
Yeah.
Most software has too many features.
Agreed.
Full stop.
And it's just hard to find things.
It's hard to find that we waste a lot of time
And they
chasing around where
move.
stuff
If you're
is.
a Windows user, it moves.
All the time.
That
right?
was in the control panel. Now it's here. Now it's in this new area within it. Yeah.
And when you say control panel, which control panel do you mean?
Classic control panel or new modern. Yeah, exactly.
And how about I don't care? What I'd like to say is, please turn on my VPN connection to so-and-so.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Or switch
Switch
me
to
to
dark mode. Yeah,
exactly.
et cetera. Yeah.
And so the idea that here's a tool aware of all of that motion that with a natural language interface on top of it can guide me to those things so that I spend as little time futzing with those details so I could do the real work.
Yeah.
That's pretty compelling.
I think the two things that really struck me was one, finally getting ChatGPT to put in sources, which I think is really important.
Yeah,
One of those things.
I appreciate when Bing first came along with this, and as you were doing searches, it was footnoting its the sources for its summaries.
Yeah.
That just spoke well of we need more transparency in this. Like by their nature, neural nets are not transparent.
No, not at all.
And so any mechanism we can do to try and lift a little of that veil is wise, because sooner or later there are going to be serious consequences.
Right.
People are over expecting from these tools. It's amazing how powerful when words come from a computer that the number of folks who just respond to that as gospel, when it's simply not even close to true.
No.
It's arguably the opposite of it. You should be highly skeptical.
Right.
And but when you have that kind of power, to at least annotate it so that when someone questions it, you don't just get to say, the computer said so. It's like,
Right.
Here are the footnotes.
With great
Read
power
the
comes
footnotes.
great responsibility.
Yeah, and I think we're going to need more transparency. I don't think we're doing a good enough job yet.
Yeah, the other thing that really excited me was the idea of plugins.
Right.
That, hey, let's plug in Spotify, let's plug in Zillow, let's plug in, Jira, Confluence, and Cloud and these things the same way that we've been integrating them into Teams and some of the other apps, and have seen, Slack do and everybody else to finally bring those in, I think starts to open up like, oh, okay. Like that was a real eye-opener for me today to go, that's interesting if I can bring in that information into this as I'm doing from these other sources and get all these apps to talk together. Because I think, the goal has been, how do we get all this content that's in the cloud within your own company? Because you've got all your email, you've got all your stuff in OneDrive, you've got all your databases, you've got CRM, you have all the stuff that's floating around in Viva Land and all of that in Syntex. How do we bring that all together? But now adding in plugins really allows you to go even beyond those walls. And that's what we're talking about with Fabric.
Apps that are savvy to the data we have in organizations. But you're touching on a bigger issue, which is certainly talked about with what they're now calling Microsoft Fabric, which the name makes me sad. Right. Because we have other things called Fabric already.
Yes.
And the fact that this one happens to be related to data is different from all the other ones.
Yes.
But there's been initiatives to try and consolidate company data into some kind of repository where we can put the metadata over top of it in a way that any tool can get to it.
Yeah.
Like for me, living as a developer, my relational database generally has all the metadata stripped out of it because it's organized into tables and rows to maximize efficiency and search performance. The metadata, the understanding of the data, lives in a data abstraction layer that is code. Right. Which I can read, but very few other people can read. Right. But when you look at Microsoft's efforts in their Dataverse projects and their data warehousing projects and so forth, that's all in a space where they're trying to define that metadata over top of the data itself.
And that's different than the graph, which that's where some of the confusion, I think, for folks is coming in.
So many product names. Right?
I know.
But
that all seems similar, yeah.
Yeah. But you get to the key point, which is we would like a tool that allows us to have a corporate memory.
Right.
That has access to all the information we have, that can remind us, hey, we've done this before.
Yeah.
We've already made that report. We've gone down this path before, which is, typically beholden to individuals that are long-termers, and it gets lost when they're gone. So the idea that we can consolidate some data around a large language model that can help us discover more from it, so that we can start to take advantage of the information we already have and have just struggled to do much with all these different tools. I'm going to argue about names a bit, but the goal is worthy.
Yeah. And now we're looking at, and this will be the keynote tomorrow with Panos, bringing it into, and one of the things that, is interesting is Windows as a platform rather than app. It's something that we did, at Microsoft quite a while ago, and I was involved in all that. But now bringing this into it and truly turning it into a platform and bringing that to life. What were your thoughts at that?
Well, we wondered how operating systems become less and less relevant over time.
Yes.
Right? Because we're largely interoperable. It doesn't matter that much.
No, and with VMs and M365 images, it's whatever you're going to put inside your browser very often.
But I would argue the only thing less discoverable than figuring out all the things you would have in Office.com is all the stuff you have installed in your PC.
Oh, God, yeah.
Like, there's so many apps.
Yeah.
There's so many different capabilities you probably aren't exploiting.
No.
Like the idea that, again, we could have a natural language interface over top of that you express your intent. I need to do X.
Right.
And that it has the savvy to look at what's in your machine and go, here are great tools for that.
Right.
And then can tap the corporate data set to say, here's similar work that's already been done, and you're going to need this information. And maybe you should talk to this person.
Right.
Because they previously worked on it. Like, all the things you could do by hand if you were diligent enough.
Right.
But you're too busy getting work done to do it all.
Yeah.
So, to create that path of least resistance, just describing the goal takes care of a bunch of that.
Yeah. I mean, this is not going to take jobs away. There are some, yes, that can be replaced, but this is really going to get rid of a lot of that busy work. I love the fact that I will very soon be able to say, hi, I'm going to meet with this XYZ customer. Mm-hmm. Take a look at all my emails, all the presentations that I've done, and pull that together and give me a summary of what we've talked about today.
Yeah, what's the previous corporate interactions with this customer?
So I can better prepare, grab the top line and put it together in a 2-pager. That makes a lot of sense. It's not something that, I could do that, but that's a lot of time shuffling through all those different areas that are already connected.
And as typical with automation, you get the same effect, which is you are going to do more in less time.
Yes.
So maybe there are fewer people involved.
It's quite possible.
But it's also the normal progress. We also used to write everything out of pen or type it out on typewriter.
Right.
Like, we've improved these technologies. And this also, to me, seems like an incremental improvement. But at the same time is also the first thing as impressive as the GUI for productivity. Mm-hmm. We used to use PCs all from a command line.
Yes.
We got the GUI back in the 80s, and it was a productivity boost.
It really was.
And it's interesting to see to have natural language now be a potentially even more viable GUI because of its innate ability to discover stuff and to be able to navigate within the machine. Obviously, at some point, we'll add voice to this. Like, it seems obvious.
Yeah.
But
Siri has never been a smart assistant. It's only as good as what it can search and bring up. This really brings that promise that a lot of people have been waiting for, but it's still very, very limited. And I think, how companies are going to do this and how they're going to do it safely, I think it's what's important. If you are the CISO for a company, what are you thinking right now as you're looking at all these tools? What should be going through your mind, or what is going through your mind?
Yeah, I think I think it recognizes a hype cycle, so be cautious.
Yes.
There will be a wave that passes, and this is one of those times when it's good to wait.
What do you mean by that? Dig into that a little bit.
Well, I think
that is a very bold statement, which is why I'm happy that you're here.
As much as I live on the edge a lot and get to talk to other people about the storytelling, as an engineer and I'm responsible for things, I like the 80% case. I like reliable. I tend to want to build something that keeps working.
Right.
I know this product's in rapid evolution right now, that its potential for competitive advantage is largely hype.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you can see it. Doesn't mean it's true. Mm-hmm. And the costs of being an early adopter are high because then you're on the ride of all of the corrections that are coming.
Right.
And so there's a strong case for let this ride down a bit and have those fixes in place so that you can take the version that's dealt with a lot of that already.
Right.
Because it's going to be dealt with without a doubt.
It has to be, yeah.
Microsoft's highly motivated to keep this Azure consumption where it's at. It's their whole business, ultimately. Mm-hmm. And let's be clear, large language models are massive Azure consumers.
Yeah.
But if being on the leading edge is advantage to you and you're willing to do the bleeding for that, because that's what the edge means,
right?
Go for it.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah.
Right? At a time when unemployment's at a record low, sure, there's some economic uncertainty, but businesses are generally doing very well.
Yeah.
Like, you're mostly for most people that are businesses are being a little more uncertain, it's like, work on the things you know are going to have good returns. This is hype. We don't know that it's going to have good returns.
Right, no.
Better data analytics will have good returns.
Yes.
Better inter-process communication with different parts of the company always have good returns.
Although they promised that with Viva, and I'm going to have Chris McNulty on and talk about syntax and all that at some point, but companies are only sort of starting to see it. Because you also have to be willing to make changes within how you're doing things to bring that to fruition.
The graph is a challenging space to work.
It is.
I mean, as an IT person, I've been responsible for enough Exchange to know you are responsible for identifying inappropriate email. The company is liable if someone's harassing through the mail server. Right. And we've always had mechanisms to deal with that. The graph is that on steroids.
Oh,
right?
God, yeah.
Now, in theory, all of this information is corporate information, but it doesn't not make it creepy. Right? So you also have to figure out how we utilize that data effectively. And you can see in all the products that Microsoft's been building in that space that they're struggling to understand a way to surface that. And so again, it's like kind of those things where it's like, hey, I can let you guys figure that out.
Yeah.
I think some of the Viva products are very compelling. And it's worthwhile to experiment with those because you also know those are being heavily used inside of Microsoft as well. So they've been hammered down. But the chat stuff's way newer than that. And we're only just seeing the very rough edges of it right now. Yeah. I'm glad people are excited, but when I talk about the limited number of dollars I have to spend on initiatives that are going to keep my company efficient at a time when my leadership is nervous,
right?
These experimental projects aren't there.
No.
There's so many good things on my to-do list to spend energy on that I know have significant returns from our organizations. I'd be irresponsible not to do those first. Now, if I've got some spare time, I'm going to have some fun with these tools.
Of course.
They're interesting.
Yeah. And I'm seeing some companies that are building their own interface to connect with ChatGPT, but to limit and filter what's going into it, what's being said, where are things going. Because, one of the key things to, that's important is a learning language model has to learn.
Yeah.
And it comes from the stuff that's being put in. But how, this is what I'm interested in really understanding is, how do I know what the learning language model grabbed of mine and what it's kept and what is in there as part of what it learned and what it didn't and what's staying, and being able to monitor that at a low level by creating your own interface to this right now is the best way. Once we get to ChatGPT, that's going to be, or a Copilot, that's going to get taken away.
Well, and I think we saw in the tools from the announcement just today that they're making great tools for doing prompt management.
Right.
For understanding the kind of language you're willing to accept through the tool, where you're going to direct it into corporate resources and so forth. So, again, from the IT perspective, it's like, I will be willing to put this in my organization when I have good governance on what can go, what will be retained by it.
Right.
I mean, the reality is if you share corporate secrets with the bot should be telling me as the IT admin that you have.
Right. Yeah.
And there's no reason it couldn't, right? This is just governance software layered around it.
Right.
It's just too early.
Yeah, we haven't seen any of it yet, and there's no documentation.
But I think we saw the first signs of that path being developed by Microsoft.
Yes. Where you could put in words and it would automatically flag and say some of the language. And yes, that is the beginning of it. I'm curious to see where this is going. But I think the important thing for the audience, and this is what we're saying, is this is all great, but there's nothing to play with right now. Only a few companies have it.
Sure.
We haven't seen a demo. There's no timeline on when the public is going to be able to get their hands on this. And a lot of it, and a lot of the success is going to come from all the third-party stuff that we're going to see come into it. It's one of the reasons why the Windows Phone failed was there was no apps from the big companies in doing that. Without the apps, it doesn't work.
And so, I mean, part of the energy of the hype cycle is to get as many people engaged as possible.
Exactly.
Right? But until they have a price list, How serious do you think they are?
Yeah, and everybody's assuming all this stuff is going to be free, and that's not sustainable for Microsoft.
Yeah. And until they're starting to talk about what the prices are going to be, and they just haven't been, we're fooling ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, this is not going to be a free product. It could be highly valuable. The idea that my information workers would be describing their work tasks and guided through being successful with them, and that information be available to the organization as a whole, like, all of that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
That even a fairly high cost per person is probably worthwhile, has not been demonstrated yet.
Yeah.
And that should be a rational buying decision. Is it going to make a difference where you get on it this month or next month? I'm not convinced.
Right.
In the end, until it's a switch in M365 to turn on, it's noise.
No. And with so many companies saying we have too much software, we want to do less, we want to get rid of some of the duplicitous pieces.
Sure.
I was chatting with a customer yesterday who's like, we have Slack and Teams. We've tried to get rid of Slack a bunch of times and it just won't die, and we really want to go to Teams. What do we need to do? And we're like, well, what other apps are you using? And when we started talking about Confluence and Cloud, we're like, well, those integrate into Teams. They're like, they do? Like, no clue. And I said, the problem is a lot of, especially developers and folks who have picked software, picked it 3 to 5 years ago, and so much has happened.
Yeah.
And I think Copilot and things like that will do that again, but it's time to reevaluate some of those and go, why are you using this? I like to be able to be in multiple tenants at once and be able to switch between those chats. New Teams has that, We talked about that in the previous episode. So a lot of these things are coming in, which is going to make that difference. Well, is Copilot, though, going to get people to really invest heavily in this, to buy it, to make it a company standard, to leverage it? Do you think the future's there?
I think so. I think because of the productivity boost. I'm also interested in, like, Security Copilot. Again, it's not that hard for you to do the KB searches and to maybe run some map explorers in your network and do all those things. But most of us are part-time tinfoil hatters.
Right.
So the fact that I have a bot that walks me through the procedure every time, so that the once a month where I get to put the hat on, I have a guide.
Yeah.
Now think about that for all the other problems we have in IT.
Yeah.
Right? Let's go hunt down extraneous SharePoint installs.
Yeah.
All stuff we could do.
Right.
But imagine having tooling that pulled in the software that exists that you may not know about that helped us with that.
Yeah.
So that we're cleaning things up, we're understanding more. I've not met a sysadmin that isn't overwhelmed. The list, they're never getting to the bottom of 2 lists. The list is growing faster than they can prosecute.
Oh, yeah.
And it
is reactive, not proactive. And that's always the goal of every IT pro, is to move from reactive to proactive, where I actually have time to test my backups and make sure that they actually really work.
Yeah.
And those sort of things, which, if you haven't done that lately, you should.
You really should.
It's really, really important that you probably at some point.
We don't care about backups. We care about restores.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
But now think about it from an information worker perspective as well. That being able to get to the point where you're no longer reactive. That you're proactively working on next tasks and new information opportunities and so forth, because you've got tooling that keeps you flowing.
Yeah.
So the productivity potential is huge, without a doubt. But we're such early days.
Yeah.
This is the first time Microsoft's really sat down in an event and said, okay, well, here's what we've been working on. It's May. ChatGPT was released the end of November. It's very, very, even in internet time, that's not a lot of time.
No.
And there's so much more to be done. It feels a bit like a race, but I think part of that is a PR opportunity.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm also not used to Microsoft leading. Like, that's
very
interesting.
And Bard not being a success. Like, when it launched, people were like, oh man, this thing sucks compared to ChatGPT. That was another surprising, because you think Google, with everything they've been doing, that when they came out, people were going, oh, this is ChatGPT on steroids or something along that line.
I agree. Now, when you actually compared the 2 demos, they weren't that far off, but I think people had a very positive view of what was happening with ChatGPT, and were kind of anti-Bard, and the bias hurt them.
I played with it, and I was not as impressed as I was with ChatGPT 4. And that's the thing, is I was using 4, not 3.5 or 3, and Bard still seemed to be kind of at the 2.03 version. where there were still some simple things that it was struggling with or not really grabbing relevant data. So, and that's the thing with this is changes are happening in hours or days, not in quarters or cycles.
Well,
like
and I wonder if the size of the cloud matters. Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
GCP's not that big a beast, especially when we're talking about massive compute like this.
Right.
Like I only think there's 2 companies that could dish out the amount of compute involved to build these, and one of them's a warehousing company that doesn't seem to be all that interested in this problem space so far. So
far,
kind of got to be Microsoft for now,
Yeah.
at least. I certainly think that I'm not used to them being out front on something, and they have a killer brand.
Yes.
Like how strange is that?
I know.
Like this should have been Data Analytics Foundation or something.
Yeah.
Copilot's brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
Not the least of which is like you're the pilot.
Yeah.
This makes it your fault.
Right. Not like Clippy. Can I help you?
Yeah,
it's moving in that. So is this is kind of my wrap up question.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the touching the obelisk, throwing the bone in the sky, 2001: A Space Odyssey kind of moment that we're looking at right now? Or is that how people are viewing it, but it's really not at that point? Is this, as Satya said, as we see, as technology comes in, so does the quality of human life, and it's tripled and doubled in what we're seeing here. Is this going to fill that promise that he's saying?
I think
we put on a little mood lighting.
Yeah,
This is a really important, heavy question. So, yeah.
And my light just quit on us.
That's okay.
I think we're at Windows 1, right?
Okay.
The buttons are cool. Most people don't have a mouse yet, but we're starting to figure it out. And nobody can predict, what Windows 11 looks like when you're looking at Windows 1.
Yeah.
We've got the first generation of a new GUI, and it's kind of cool, but it's far from refined.
Yeah.
And it's far from demonstrating value.
Yes. It's a good way of putting it.
But it's well placed to do so.
Yeah.
And there's some serious forces working on making that happen.
I'm excited to see where this goes. Tomorrow we have a great keynote that will be Panos talking more about what we're going to see in Windows and what's going on there. And I have a deep love of the Windows platform, as I have for many years. So I think bringing that in is going to make it's certainly going to add value to the Windows platform.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, plugins, which I did not really think about, I think that's really going to bring a lot of value to that.
Well, bringing an API forward that anybody can comply with, and then they can run with that API and other models from there, that's how you build an ecosystem.
Yes.
And again, for better or worse, Microsoft's good at building ecosystems.
Yeah.
Better than almost anybody else.
No, we learned a lot from the failure. They learned a lot from the failure in Windows Phone and trying to do that and bringing that together.
But
what
also
happens when there's already established ecosystems and you try to get in, you have to be in the front of
But
that.
also the many successes.
Yeah.
Olay, ActiveX, the VBX and the OCX in Visual Basics. Like we've built a lot of places where third parties could be wildly successful in those ecosystems.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're offering a new one, all the better for all of us.
No, I agree. I think it's going to be interesting. I'd like to circle back at this after Ignite. We should chat again and see what's happened.
It'll be
between now
interesting
and
to
the
see
fall.
where we are by the fall.
Yeah. I think that'll be it. Awesome, Richard. Thanks as always for joining.
My pleasure,
Great
friend.
to see you. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.